In, the, in this video, I want to talk about why codependents don't heal themselves. And as an interesting bonus, and maybe something to think about as we're going through this is why benevolent aliens or more intelligent or more evolved beings would not come to this earth. And I'm talking about benevolent aliens and why they would not. And so I want to talk about what is codependency, and I want to talk about the major reasons that we don't deal with codependency. It's, to me, by and far the biggest spiritual bypass or even self-help bypass that there is. And it's popular in our culture, and I'll talk about why. So first of all, what is codependency? Well, if you could read miles of psychological books and read up on popular culture and all that stuff, but there's a simple formula that I was taught. I use it and it works, and it just makes things very simple. So it goes like this. It's the control complex. Narcissism, and I'm not talking about narcissists, because our culture has popularized this idea of there are just these narcissists. No. Narcissism and codependency is an aspect that we all deal with. It's all an egocentric, control-based thing that we deal with. So there you go. That's a really good first understanding of why codependents don't work on their own stuff. But I have, even bigger ones than that. So here's the formula. If you're in a narcissistic state, you think of yourself before you think of others. If you're in a codependent state, you think of others before you think of yourself. So you can see that it's out of balance. So you might ask yourself, what's the balance point? What if you are thinking about other people and you're thinking of yourself equally? Well, that's called interdependency. And when we get to that point, you're no longer in the control paradigm. You're not playing the control game. So how does the control game work? Well, the narcissist obviously takes control through mental, ways of subjecting their will on another person. So basically, just to make it simple, they gain control in order to get power or status. A codependent, on the other hand, they do the opposite. They give away their control so that they can gain whatever benefit they're going to get from the narcissist. So they're trying to gain power as well. Both aspects are riddled with entitlement. The narcissist would say, I'm entitled to what I can get from, being smarter than you, wittier than you, whatever else. And not necessarily conscious. Let's look at this as that it's not necessarily a conscious decision, and most times it's not. It's an unconscious thing that people do. That's how they relate with the world, and they don't know any different. And a codependent says, I'm entitled, so if I give you my control, if I give this control away, then I'm entitled to whatever reward I get from doing that. And so you can see this is a game that's being played. And you can also see that there's a bit of narcissism within codependency, and there's actually a bit of codependency within narcissism. So basically, when I think of those two things now, I think of them as equal. I do not think of a narcissism under one pretense and a codependent under another pretense. And that is absolutely not the way that our culture looks at that or deals with it at all. And this is not something that is difficult to check up on. Do a search for narcissist support groups. There's last time I checked, there was 2.3 million hits on Google. Do codependent support groups. It's like 700,000. If you're in conversation, people don't talk about codependency. Everybody's talking about the narcissist, and people become experts in narcissists, but never deal with why the narcissist is there. And so why don't they? And I'm going to use a personal anecdote for this, and it'll prove my point. When I first started self-help and I started to learn about myself and started to look at my inner workings and how I worked, one of the very first real, let's just use this metaphor, 2x4s that hit me over the head of behavior that I had been doing all my life unconsciously came up for me. And I had absolutely no realization. I was completely unconscious to that behavior. And what it was that I would play this mental game. And this is something that actually it came up from having a discussion with my mother, because it was her talking about my behavior as a child. So I brought it straight from my childhood into my adulthood. What I would do is I would hold an expectation in my head. And if somebody didn't live up to that expectation, I would get mad. And this especially happened with family members and significant others and that sort of thing. Well, I can tell you, it was a dichotomy, because first of all, it was absolutely humiliating to look at this behavior that was totally unconscious to me all of my life. Absolutely humiliating that I could go all of this time. I think I was around in my late 30s at this time when this came up to me. I was absolutely devastated that this could have been happening and I was unaware of it. The second part was that it was absolutely liberating. It was absolutely liberating because the minute that I became aware of that behavior, I just stopped doing it. It was just as simple as that. And I put on my big boy pants and I got on with things, and it was so great. So anyway, what came up for me over the next period of my life was coming into more narcissistic tendencies that I had. And narcissism is kind of a bold word to put there, but it was egocentric. Just the way that I related with my child was a big one, that I realized that I just had this notion of having a child, but I didn't have an understanding of how to really relate with a child. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I woke to that and realized there's way more going on with being a parent than I had said before. And if you've ever been humbled by parenting, I think you'll understand that. But if I had to put it through the formula, I was thinking of myself and my idea of what parenting was, rather than what was the co-creation and what was the relationship between parent and child. And so I healed that and changed my behavior immediately. And I started to find all the different ways that I was trying to gain control, and gain power really through control. And I would never have diagnosed myself with, narcissistic personality disorder. It's just this aspect of egocentrism that we meet in the world. And the reason we meet there is we live within ourselves. So we're kind of, always trying to preserve ourselves. So now let's talk about my codependency. What I want to say first is that I have always had a notion that I wanted to be a benevolent force in this world. That has been ever since I can ever remember. And I'm not saying I was, but that was always my intent. If I was in an argument and angry, it was because it wasn't a me. It was I just wanted to get the best out of a situation, that sort of thing. And it was always a belief that I wanted to do that. In fact, when I really started on a spiritual journey, my tagline was "Your biggest fan," because what I wanted to do was I wanted to love everybody. And that was my goal. I looked at Jesus, not necessarily Christianity, but I looked at Jesus as a mentor. how could he be so kind, and especially the people that he was so kind to. And I was like, I want to do that. Like, that's who I want to become. I want to know compassion at that depth or that level. And I went through many, many years of self-discovery, and it wasn't until some situations came up where I realized that I had given up control. I'd given of myself so that somebody had power over me, and then I was giving that away so I could have the power, and the power was of that relationship. And I can tell you that that was more devastating and humbling than when I discovered my egocentrism or my narcissism. Actually, codependency is also an egocentric aspect, but my narcissistic ideas. And the reason is because who I was built on this story of who I thought I was. That I was this benevolent force in the world, and that I was just going and doing better things, and I was just getting better and better. And then when I realized it, I had been enabling a power struggle. And it's not even that I was enabling narcissism. What I was doing was, in my own dysfunction of codependency, was I was not sending that person on their journey. They needed to wake up to, and this is numerous people I have come to know that I work this way. And so it wasn't just the fact that there was these evil narcissists who had control over me. It was the fact that I was a part of that equation. And if you look at the equation, you find out that you're part of it. And this is the reason that I say that people in our culture do not deal with codependency, is because it's more difficult to deal with that than it is to deal with that you're a narcissist. And the other thing is it's a very obvious thing. Narcissists, like literal narcissists, aren't, everybody aren't in conversations about narcissists, or they are trying to explain their narcissism away. But it's just a bunch of codependents together pointing outside of us, outside of themselves, and I'm me included, pointing outside of ourselves and saying, it's their fault. We have this in our culture. Narcissists are the greatest scapegoat by far. And so I brought up the point of why would benevolent aliens not come down to Earth and show themselves? And this is a reason, a very fantastic reason. First of all, people don't want to deal with, they avoid doing the work. And the reason they don't want to destroy the image that they have of themselves. So now look at somebody like me who made a commitment to self-discovery, to working on their shadow. I mean, I was always as committed as far down as I could know. I always wanted to know truth. And the aspect of waking up to my codependency was absolutely devastating to who I thought I was. And now again, I have already done a lot of work in the realm of not having an identity that's connected with outside forces and all of these things. And then all of a sudden to have these things sprung on me was absolutely devastating. Now, in the moments when those things happen, what ends up happening is we have so much psychic energy. And I'm not talking about psychic energy like in a like a mystical or a woo-woo kind of way. I'm looking at like literally psychic energy. That's, it's how our mind works. And we have energy levels. It's kind of like, if you've had a really mentally stimulating day, you only have so much you don't have so much psychic energy, right? And that's what ends up happening. This is what happens when people have meltdowns and go into depressions and that sort of thing. In fact, a depression is just the psyche. It's actually it's a way that the psyche protects itself. is that it takes you into a depression rather than having you deal with the things because you're not ready to deal with it, right? And so this was devastating to me. So you can imagine my psychic level went down, my psychic energy level went down. But imagine if you're not even on this, you're not even on this journey at all, and you all of a sudden like are given the realization of your behavior and the dire consequences that you've piled on top of yourself all your life, and it all comes crashing down because you've held on to a deep belief, because people have these beliefs and they just don't even realize what, it's unconscious. And so I will say this is that this isn't about trying to like shake people or to say that codependency is this horrible thing. If anything that I can offer to people is that if you find yourself, first of all, attracting narcissism and narcissists into your world, it's a good idea to start, you could start looking at yourself and saying, okay, wait a minute. Because in the formula, it's codependency is just bait for narcissism. They go together. I mean, it's a function. And I would also hope in this video that people would stop the idolization of, or consider stopping the idolizing the narcissist as the villain. That would be a huge step in anybody's progress. Because really, when you start to study this and understand it, and you get to that interdependent state, you now start to see your level of entitlement go way down. And what goes down, because entitlement is connected with expectation, and you have to manage expectation. So what ends up going down, when expectations go down, gratitude goes up. And so there's something to gain from this. So this is not like a punitive, I'm not trying to come from a punitive place. I'm coming from a just awareness place, is what I would love to get across in this. So if you have any questions or have stories or anything, I'm happy to hear them. And then if I have an answer for it, I will try to answer it.